What's up, people? I didn't have a chance to get all the way home, so this is what you get. I think you can comment, as far as I know. All right, so I'll probably start talking here. So, oh yeah, here we go. Okay, so here's the deal. Two big topics on the exam. The first is imperialism, obviously, and the second one is World War I. Not a whole lot on the battles of World War I. I mean, got about the Allies won, the U.S. joined kind of relatively late, so on and so forth. I'm gonna make my lights a little brighter really quick. Okay, so I guess I'm wondering what questions you have related to the review guide, so on and so forth. I'm going to pull mine up right now just so I have access to it somewhere. There it is. Boom shakalaka. Oh, there's Ella. So I would say no. Like, I'm not going to ask a question about who were the winners, but yeah, they were on the Allied. Russia was on the Allied side. However, Russia leaves in 1917, and then eventually becomes the Soviet Union. So they're not usually considered to be like in the winners. In fact, they lost land because they left early. They had to negotiate a treaty with Germany, and that treaty gave a whole bunch of Soviet or Russian territory to Germany. So that's why they lost land. That's how I would consider them. They just had to hold on a little bit longer. I don't know, player one retracted their message. Let's see. Yeah, so to be honest, I feel like this unit was pretty straightforward. You got to know kind of I like to try to think about like what the bookends of them are. So you want to start with the Spanish-American War, 1898. You're ending with the end of World War I in 1918 is when it ends. 1919, they get like the whole treaty and everything. So that's when like the Palmer raids are and the Red Scare. So somewhere around there. And then just knowing some different places that the U.S. imperialized and why and what the arguments were and what some of the outcomes were. Those will all be helpful for you. Political cartoons, we spent a lot of time looking at those. So you should be able to look at one and understand if it's pro or anti-imperialist and explain why. It's not necessarily as important that you get the perspective correct. I mean, I think that is important because I would pick one that was fairly obvious. But then explaining how you know, and then thinking about, does it represent cultural, moral, economic, or political? And then thinking about outside information. All those things will definitely show up related to a cartoon. Sweet. What other questions do you all have, or do you want to have more explanation of? Military examples and events of imperialism. Yeah, sure. So there's not a ton of there's not a lot of places where we want a military base here, so we're gonna go get a military base here. It was more kind of like one overarching reason for imperialism was that the U.S. felt like it needed to have a bigger, stronger military, and that it needed to be able to project power throughout the world. So one of the arguments that people made, like this guy Alfred Mahan, which I believe we read, was about like the importance of sea power and having a strong navy. So it kind of just went hand in hand. I don't think there was really a place where the U.S. specifically targeted for military reasons, but that ended up becoming a byproduct. So, for example, Spanish-American War, the U.S. gains a variety of territory, including Cuba, which they lease Guantanamo Bay, which is used for a naval base, which is still used today, as well as being a detention center. Though if you ask somebody in the military about that, they'll just tell you that it doesn't exist. So anyway, maybe not necessarily that. But so Guantanamo Bay in Hawaii, they set up a military base or naval base at Pearl Harbor. I believe they set up some in the Philippines as well, but military tends to be an overarching argument for imperialism, and then it kind of becomes like a byproduct after the U.S. goes places. Let's see, what else? Oh, I should probably tell my brother about this because he gets excited. Other places you've got, so I'm not going to do them in like necessarily chronological order, but hang on. You have Spanish-American War is the first one. Then as a result of the Spanish-American War, the U.S. gains access to the Philippines and Puerto Rico and kind of Cuba, but they allow it to maintain its independence except for allowing the U.S. to intervene during certain circumstances, and Guantanamo Bay. Hawaii gets annexed around that time. Even though the uprising in Hawaii happened a little bit before that, but they don't get annexed, added on to the U.S. for a little bit after that. Then you've got the Filipino insurrection. So the Filipinos aren't too happy with having people or Americans there after they just felt like they fought to get rid of the Spanish. So that causes a problem. After putting down that insurrection, you start to see more happening in Latin America. So places like Panama, where they kind of support, not necessarily cause, but the U.S. supports the Panamanian rebellion against Colombia, and then uses Panama as a place to build the canal. The French had actually been trying to build the canal, but then they gave up because of malaria, and then the U.S. comes in and does it. You also have China, which isn't a place that the U.S. directly goes into, but they do have the open door notes, which is trying to get Europe to share in the Chinese market and allow America to have open access to trade in China. Let's see, the Philippines, Nicaragua, where you have a popular uprising that the U.S. sends the military into aid Nicaragua to try to like maintain order, but a lot of that motivation was for the banana plantations, I guess you would say, that were there. So protecting that private property for American businesses. I think if I forgot any, I feel like that was all of them just now. Eventually, that extends into, do we get involved in European affairs? And you have World War I, which is like the first big example of that. Afterwards, the U.S. tries to retreat inward and not be part of the European conflicts anymore. And that, Ella, is a summary of the events of imperialism. Let's see if we got anybody else here. Uh-oh, we got people dropping off. I would say for World War I think it's important to know not so much like the general order of events. Yeah, I'll answer that in a second. The general like order of events, but more like the conceptual things. So things like militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. But don't just stop with knowing like what the acronym means. You should also understand or have an understanding of like how it played out. So like for militarism, knowing that Germany and Britain were competing for naval supremacy, or alliances, knowing that there was the Triple Entente and also the Central Powers and who they were. And for imperialism, knowing that a lot of these nations were competing over Africa. and Asia to an extent, and the Balkans. And then for nationalism, understanding that a lot of these nations have a lot of pride. So when somebody like a Serbian terrorist in Bosnia kills a archduke from Austria-Hungary, that becomes an issue. People want to assert their national pride, maintain their national pride, things like that. Ella says, question 4 on topic 1. By the end of the time period, how did the United States' role in the world change? So, what we typically say, well, thanks, Isaac, for just being here. What we typically say is, at the beginning of the time period, the U.S. was relatively isolationist. So they tended to stay out of the affairs of other nations, especially Europe. But even unless it was a direct war that the U.S. was involved in, or American Indian removal, or a civil war, the U.S. tended to stay out of international affairs. As a result of imperialism, they are seeing themselves more so as a force in international affairs, specifically within the Western Hemisphere. So in places like Latin America, in the Pacific specifically, Hawaii, things like that. So becoming more of like a global power or global influencer, if you will. The U.S. also, we didn't have time to talk about it specifically, but there's this thing called the Roosevelt Corollary, where President Theodore Roosevelt basically says that the U.S. is now going to act as the policeman of the Western Hemisphere. So basically the U.S. is just becoming more predominant, especially in the Western Hemisphere. So I would say that's the big change, going from isolationist to very much involved, both economically and militarily in other places. Isaac, I appreciate even if you don't have a donation. Let me show you what other questions I have that I put on the review. Ooh, yeah, 2 people that supported imperialism. I think a really good one for 2 people that supported imperialism is Albert Beveridge, definitely. And then you could really use any of the presidents from this time period were pretty supportive. Teddy Roosevelt, William Howard Taft, William McKinley with the Philippines, Alfred Mayhem with the importance of sea power. People that are against it were like Mark Twain, the Anti-Imperialist League, William Jennings Bryan. I forget the guy's name from South Carolina, but Ben Tillman, sorry, from South Carolina. More for the racial issues. Let's see. Did the main causes use the acronym? Specific event that set off World War I, so knowing the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Number 3 in topic 3, causes of World War I, says what were the competing arguments surrounding the motivations for U.S. involvement in World War I? So that was kind of a reference to the activity we did in class where we had the competing viewpoints and primary and secondary sources. So looking at what sources supported the U.S. doing it for human rights. So thinking about German submarine warfare. Yeah, I'll get that second for you, Victor, no problem. Also just thinking about like democratic and human rights and things like that, and what Woodrow Wilson said versus the argument that it was more for financial interests and money and the U.S. making loans and things of that nature. What did you say? Topic 4, question 5. Yeah, so yeah, that's kind of a similar one to the one from imperialism as well. So basically just looking at how it's kind of a toss-up. The U.S., as a result of World War I, has become involved in European affairs and is more involved in European affairs than it ever really was, at least since the beginning of the 19th century. However, the U.S. also, the other thing is a lot of these nations owe the U.S. money. So the U.S. is like a major creditor in the world. So a lender, if you will, people owe them money. That's good for the American economy in general. But at the same time, the U.S. really just wants to kind of take a step back for a while and find itself. So there's this whole idea, they call it, Warren G. Harding, who's the Republican president candidate who becomes president, he used to call it a return to normalcy. It was kind of a word that like he made up or somebody made up. Everybody uses it now, but it's not technically grammatically correct. So a return to normalcy, or just kind of like staying back and focusing on things at home. So it's this weird thing, Victor, where on one side, they're like, they are involved in European affairs, but the flip side, they kind of want to stay out of things for the foreseeable future, which is one reason why when World War II comes around, they're very hesitant to get involved and try to remain neutral for a long time. So that's what I would say for question 5. Let's see, we have which countries are victorious. I think that kind of went over that already. 2 specific ways that it impacted people at home. That was a video for an at-home assignment. Arguments against imperialism. Yeah, sure. There's not really a huge military anti-imperialist argument unless you're just anti, unless you're more of somebody that's like a neutralist or a pacifist or something like that. Yeah, so there's not a ton of military ones except for people that just think that America should stay out of global affairs and just focus on things at home. Economically, there were people that believed that having a more globalized America would only hurt, and this is very similar to today, would hurt lower level workers and help, the people that own the factories and the corporations. For example, a lot of these American companies were now planting, fruit, different plantations in Latin America instead of maybe doing it in America, which is going to cost, the average American jobs. There was a worry that organized labor would kind of move that way as well. So factory workers, they would start building factories in Latin America and the Pacific, and that would hurt American workers as well. So a very similar argument to today. So that would be an argument, economic argument against imperialism. But most arguments against imperialism kind of focused on that issue of cultural moral responsibility and human rights and things like that. Things like Espionage Sedition Act are good to know. Red Scare. Palmer raids you don't need to know a ton about, but just understanding the relationship to communism being a major concern in America. And that's pretty good. Any general questions that you have, either related to the review or not? I need a haircut. It's getting crazy. Yeah, I thought it would be better to finish the territory before the test, but I also want to make sure that everybody has time to do the test. So the test isn't going to be too long. But the test has 2 sections. There's an imperialism section and a World War I section. Overall, there's 15 points on each section. They're very equitable in that way. So I think there's like a short answer section at the end of the imperialism section, and there's like 1 or 2 short answers at the end of the World War I section. It's not going to take you years to finish. You'll probably get 1 wrong though, I would imagine. Maybe 2, just so I would probably just take 2 points off of yours, Ella. Landon Meyer, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it. Besides, Ella, Italy's got to try to win. Yeah. How many questions? I don't remember. Less than 30 because it's 30 points, and some of those are short answer. Your previous question's moot because it doesn't reflect reality. Let's see. I'm trying to think of other things. Yeah, I don't know. We got to figure out if Italy's going to maintain the lead. I also have to score the other class too. I forgot to score theirs. I think Britain's winning though. Team 2. Just genetics. Scientific anti-realism. What? Why are we thinking about makeups already? Who are you, account loading? Stop it. You're not going to need to do a retake. You're going to be fine. How far ahead are you? I didn't say. Not much. I don't remember where I put it. I think I put it in my US history folder. I think a few points, like 4 points, something like that. Not going to need to retake it. You're going to be fine. You're all going to do splendidly. It's going to be great. Yeah, it is close. Italy's not supposed to win, Ella. I'll wait like another minute or so. See if anybody's got any last dying burning questions, because I feel like we're just chatting now. What I said last time. It's true anyway. You're gonna be fine. Yeah, you do, Landon. You got like a 40% on that one. All right, people. Well, then I'll just wrap it up, I guess. So, political cartoons, cause and effect, changing U.S. role in the world. 3 big things to think about. If you have any questions between now and tomorrow or Wednesday, let me know. Otherwise, take care of yourselves, and we will talk on the flip side.